Hello and welcome, it's me Nathan, your friendly neighborhood support engineer, and in today's video we're going to be talking about the Setup Wizard. Now this is a feature that is commonly disregarded as something that most people don't use. Admittedly, like myself, I consider myself an expert. Ditch the Setup Wizard and just start configuring the PBX. However, if you're new to GrandStream, and you don't know how to navigate our PBX, the Setup Wizard is an amazing tool that you can use to have about 75% of your initial configuration set up. The Setup Wizard will go over securing your PBX, configuring your network settings, even setting up your time zone, as well as allocating the range for what your extensions will be. And lastly, it will allow you to configure your trunks and routes for those trunks. But with that being said, let's log into the PBX and see what Setup Wizard's all about. Now, the majority of times, if you're first logging into a PBX, one thing that you want to consider, sometimes the password is not just admin. If you look at the back of the UCM, you might have a custom password set by the manufacturer. And this adds an extra layer of security for those who might have forgotten to add a custom password to their login. But for the most part, once you first log in, you will be greeted by the Setup Wizard. However, if you logged into the PBX before, oftentimes you'll find yourself at the dashboard page. But don't worry, it's no big deal. If you happen to log in and not Setup Wizard, it doesn't mean you can't go back to it. All you got to do is click on Setup Wizard. Alright, and from here, we're going to be walked through an initial setup guide. I would, however, make sure that you know what passwords you want to set for the PBX, as well as what type of network configuration you plan on using with the PBX, as well as taking notes from the customer on what extension ranges that they want, as well as what type of trunks that they have, whether it's going to be analog, PRI if you're using our 6510, or VoIP trunks. But let's go ahead and start off by creating a new password for our system. So as you can see here, we have the old password. That's going to be either admin if you're using some of our older models, or it could be the default burned-in password, so you will have to enter it more than once when doing this. But I know on this system, I've been lucky enough just to put admin here. Then I'm going to go ahead and create a new password, and I highly recommend this is something very complicated, uppercase, lowercase, with special characters. As long as it's not simple, you are good. I'm going to go ahead and re-enter that password and then add my email address. Now this is very important because if you forget to put an email address in here, you forget your password, your PBX won't be able to send you the password reset sequence so you can get logged back in. So make sure you do this part. With that being done, we're going to go ahead and scroll down and click on Next. Now currently, this PBX I'm configuring has came in through route mode, which for some of you may be fine, but I plan on using the PoE port, and I know in route mode, the LAN port has DHCP leasing enabled by default. So I want to avoid any costly downtime when installing this PBX, so I'm going to go ahead and set this up into switch mode. That way I know my LAN port's not going to be leasing out DHCP. Alternatively, if you are in route mode and you don't want it to lease DHCP, you can go ahead and disable DHCP server. But to be quite honest, it's better if you just use switch mode, which I'm going to do here. I like that, so let's go ahead and then hit next. Next, we have to select our time zone. Now, for the most part, if you ever get to a section in which you don't have the information to fill out, you can always go ahead and hit the next button, even if you don't make changes or enter anything in. The only exception to that is for the password setting. Always make sure you change the password, even if it does allow you to skip it. But beyond that, I'm going to go ahead and set up my time zone here, which I'm going to go ahead and select General Mountain Time of -700. Date format, I'm quite happy with that. Now you could also choose between 2400 or 12-hour format, which will give you the AM PM. To be quite honest, I do like the 2400-hour format, so I'm going to keep it as such. And below you can see we also have a language option here. Currently the default's English. Your other option is Chinese. However, if you want more language prompts, you will have to log into the PBX after applying these settings, so you can download that language package for it. But with that being said, let's go ahead and hit next. Next, we're going to go ahead and create our extensions. Now, one thing I'd like you to take away from this video is our default extension ranges. So, for example, if I try to select an extension outside our range, we'd get this error message. Currently, our valid ranges are between 1,000 through 6,299. Now, if we wanted to select a range that's outside of that realm, you're going to want to go ahead and click on Disable Extension Range. Now from there, we can go ahead and select whatever extension that we want. In my case, I'm not going to keep it 100, but I'll choose to use 2,000. And just below that, we have Create Number. This is going to be how many extensions it's going to create based upon the starting extension. I'm going to go ahead and create 10 extensions, starting at 2,000. Now just below that we have the SIP password section. I highly recommend just stick with random password. That's going to be the most secure option. However, if you wanted to, you could technically create a universal password amongst all extensions. But if you're going to do this, word of caution, it will be the same password for all extensions. Make sure you use numerical values, upper and lowercase letters, as well as special characters. But with that being said, I prefer using the random password generator. It is much more secure. Now that we have that done, let's go ahead and hit next. And now this is the section in which we're going to be creating our trunks and routes. So I'm going to go ahead and click Add, and this is both going to create my trunk as well as do outbound and inbound routes for it. The next thing you'll see is the trunk type. As you can see, we have SIP, *IX trunks, analog trunks, and if you're using a 6510, you would also see PRI. However, for my example, I'm going to go ahead and use SIP trunks. I'm going to go ahead and give this a name. I'm going to call this VoIP trunk. Now, host name could either be a domain name or an IP address, and in my case, my VoIP provider is going to be from an IP address, which luckily is actually a local IP to this UCM because it's a SBC. So I'm going to go ahead and enter that local IP, 192.168.99.210. Now, I know what you might be thinking, well, what if we want to do a peer trunk? Well, if you want to do a peer trunk, all you would need is the trunk name and host name. As long as you don't put username or password information or even the auth ID in there, it won't consider it a registered trunk. Instead, it's going to default to a peer trunk as long as you don't use those settings. But in my case, I'm going to be using a registered SIP trunk. Now, in order to do this, I'm going to have to put in the username of that trunk and then add the password. And if your provider requires an authentication ID, you would also put that here. But in my case, there's no auth ID required. So we can now move on to our outbound routes. For calling rule name, call me old-fashioned, but I'll call this outbound. Now, in order to set up my pattern on the wizard, this is called our number length. So in North America, we usually support 10 and 11 digit dialing. So I'm going to go ahead and put 10 for this route. Give it a privilege level of local. Now you could go as low as internal if you wanted to, but it's set to local for a reason because a lot of call features might have an internal permission level. So it's best that we set this to local. If you run into any issues with getting extensions to dial out and they're getting an error code saying that they do not have permission to dial this number, there's a good chance that your extension permission does not exceed or match the outbound route permission level, which is currently set to local. We also have the ability to strip values off of what's being dialed. So if I wanted to strip the first value, I'd put 1. If I wanted to strip the first 3 values, I'd put 3 in here. And that will take the first 3 values and remove it before sending out the DID. But in my case, we're not going to do that because we're dialing 10 digits. You also have the ability of prepending. And in my example, if we're using a 10-digit dialing string, then that means we might be excluding the 1 in front of the area code. So this would be a good time to actually put 1 in here, so then anyone who dials a 10-digit number, 1 will be prepended on to that number, and it should successfully go out. And just below that, we have our inbound rule. Now for the inbound rules, it's always going to add X period, which is going to accept any number dialing into the system. If this was a peer trunk between a UCM, by DID would be good, because then it will allow you to dial extensions and also use this UCM SIP trunks. However, for testing purposes, for most VoIP trunks, I usually like to set it for a registered extension, which I currently have is 2000. So with that part done, I'm going to go ahead and click Save. And as you can see, we have an overview of the trunk, the outbound rule, and the inbound rule. Now, if you wanted to add another trunk, it's as simple as clicking Add. But with that being done, I'm going to go ahead and click Next. And next we have our summary page. This is the page which you can go through all the extensions and verify that you have everything correct. But with that being done, I'm going to go ahead and click Save, and once I save, it will reboot the UCM. And as you can see, some of the configuration changes require system reboot to take effect. Now, when it means some of the configuration changes, it's specifically talking about the network changes that we've made, but in my experience, it will reboot regardless if you make those changes or not. So we're going to go ahead and click OK. And from that includes our GS tutorial for today. And like I always say, this is Nathan with GrandStream Support. You have a good one. We hope that you found that video tutorial helpful, and if you did, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe to our channel for the latest in video tutorials. I'm Nathan Sharp. You have a good one.